Thanks.
All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Good to
All
go.
good. All good.
Recording in progress is up there for me, but if it's not for you, we're fine. All right. Well, thank you for inviting me. Today, we're going to talk about human intelligence. It's a pun on AI, since AI is very popular right now. I knew it would help me get selected more, to be honest. I'm going to pull up Zoom chat, maybe. No, I'm not. That's all right. Somebody just speak up if you have questions throughout this. Happy to answer as we go.
We're looking in the chat here. We're also looking for raised hands, or feel free to speak up and we can call on you there.
Perfect.
All
right. So as was already mentioned, I am the host and creator of the Agile for Agilists podcast with my partner, Drew Podwall. We have just wrapped up our third season of 12 episodes. Each episode is roughly an hour long, so that's a lot of free content out there. We try to get guests with industry experts, so it's not just us talking the whole time. We've had, Esther Derby, we've had James Brenning, Daniel Vacante. We've had tons and tons of authors and big names in the industry. And we have a new one that we're working on that's been delayed a little. As Jim mentioned earlier, I've been sick for the last month. I also apologize if my voice starts giving out ahead of time. But shortly here, we'll have a new episode with Andrew Clay Schaefer that I'm super excited to get out. As mentioned, I have over 15 years in software development, over 20 if you include my lean manufacturing background. I've worked in 6 Fortune 500 companies in IT. I have 25 certifications, which is certifications galore. I was very fortunate at my last company to work with many, many trainers. And so most of those I admittedly got for free and probably got the worst version because I was usually the guinea pig so that they could bring them to the market. But I have them nonetheless. I am in Columbus, Ohio currently, so it is 8:50 for me at night. I am from Michigan originally, which if you know anything about the Midwest is awkward to live in Ohio, but here we are. I work for Ford currently, Ford Motor Company in their credit area as a program manager for their digital department. I have to say my disclaimer that these words that I'm about to share are my own. They do not represent Ford. They may or may not agree with them, fun stuff like that. All right, that's enough about me. One of the things that I have been sharing, though, is out of those 25 certifications, most recently this year, I took an online course from Harvard's online school on happiness in leadership, which is very much related to this talk. As we go on, you'll see that that's a key component of it. So I've attempted to educate myself. I'm still reading up on this topic as much as I can to try to make sure everything I say is as factual as possible. But with that said, I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV. This content is intended for informational purposes. You can read all of that. I'm not going to read the screen. But I have had this deck peer-reviewed by a doctor that specializes in this, Dr. Raquel Garzon, and then Dom Michalik for behavior design accuracy. So it's been peer-reviewed twice, actually more times, but officially by those two. And all of these slides will be available to you. There's a link that I've generated at the end. So they're all available. There are 45 references that I will pull from. You'll see them marked on the pages. Those are all available to you as well. My goal is to be as factual and provide information. So please, if you are interested in it, fact check, download them. All right, enough disclaimers. Let's get into it. So why do you care about this talk? Well,
excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Can you please go back? Thank you. Just finishing up to the last one here. The slide.
Yeah, we can go
You're
ahead.
good. You're good. Thank you.
I'm sure we can be able to figure out being able to provide slides in the future, but we'll talk to Brad afterwards. Thanks so much.
Yep. So why you should care about this talk is it will help you improve every outcome in your life, both business related and personal, including your health. And if that sounds like a used snake oil salesman, I don't blame you for feeling that way. I worked in consulting for years, and we promise this with every offering. But this time, we are going to look at science. And so the thing that's kind of, I don't know, frustrating, I will say, as a consultant and as an agilist, is that we tend to offer all of these different frameworks, these different approaches, these different tools to try to optimize humans, but we don't truly understand how humans operate. And that's not something that we're taught as agilists. That's not something we're taught as professionals in the industry. And that's what I'm hoping to relay throughout this presentation. And in order to do that, we get to go back to biology, in specific neurobiology and psychology. We're going to look into how humans operate. And if you're a little rusty on it, that's okay. We're going to start with these things called neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are produced when neurons fire in our brain. We've probably heard of most of these before. Oxytocin, known as the love hormone, serotonin, the mood booster, endorphins, your body's painkillers, and dopamine, the reward center. Or maybe you've heard of them called the feel-good hormones. In particular, we're going to look at dopamine. The dopamine, when it's released in the brain, it helps us to keep attention. It improves our focus. It activates the learning centers of our brain that allow us to learn better. And it helps us to store and pull our memories. Pretty important, more so than just making us feel good. Same thing with serotonin. Serotonin is what wakes you up in the morning. So it provides your alertness, it affects your motivation and willpower, and it helps you manage anxiety. So these two chemicals are really, really important when we start looking at how does a human function and perform. And they're really, really good at what they do. There's been over 200 scientific studies that have found that happiness leads to success in every domain of our lives. And it's not that once we achieve the thing or once we do the thing, we'll be happy. It's actually reverse. If we're happy first, we're more likely to be successful. And that's because of how these chemicals in our brain function. But then enter everyone's favorite word, stress. And if you're lucky enough to not know what stress means, it's a response to mental or emotional strain. And it's also our prompt to address challenges or threats in our life. In the old days, thousands to millions of years ago, when we saw a threat in our environment, we would become stressed, and that would be our indication to do something about it so that we lived. Hopefully, most of us aren't threatened physically today, although I know it does still happen, but we still have things that stress us in our environments. And stress produces this hormone called cortisol, also probably not new to many of you. This is something that seems to be talked about more and more, and it's created by any sort of stress. It's considered a steroid. But what I didn't know until I started doing this research is that cortisol actually inhibits dopamine production. And it also increases the consumption of serotonin. So the hormone itself, right, we're talking biology, counteracts the two chemicals that are responsible for alertness, focus, our memory, our learning. Right? So that's where cortisol becomes detrimental to us.
Hey, Brad, just a quick question. Can we go back one slide, please?
Mm-hmm.
Just want to confirm. the two different chemicals that we're looking at. What are the two hormones on the slides here?
Yep, dopamine and serotonin.
And so serotonin on the right side, it's fulfilling the alertness, the wakefulness, the motivation, willpower, and managing that anxiety. Just want to be sure to be able to communicate that for folks in the chat.
So to answer your question, Mauro, you notice I don't call them hormones here. They act like hormones. They're neurotransmitters. They're chemicals in the brain. I mean, we're getting really sciencey here. As I mentioned, all the sources are there. If you really want to dig into them, there's also the upward spiral, which I'll mention multiple times, that he really gets into it and he talks about the parts of the brain that produce it and all of that. Definitely glad to provide that source. Yeah, they're neurotransmitters. People on the previous side, people call them the feel-good hormones. That's like slang. Maybe that's what you were thinking. And then cortisol is considered a steroid hormone. It's produced in a different part of the body. And if you haven't read, the recent life hack or Cosmopolitan or other news, elevated levels of cortisol for extended periods of time leads to weight gain, hypertension, and muscle weakness. And it creates what we often know as a downward spiral that fosters a cycle of fatigue. And stress is actually really, really bad for us. Over 90% of, or up to, says 90% of all doctors' visits are stress-related ailments and complaints. And Dr. Maté, who some I would say is a little controversial to some doctors, has even said that emotional stress is a major cause of all physical illness, including cancer and autoimmune conditions. That's his words there. But it does affect every single part of our body. Our brain also has this cool thing called neuroplasticity. That does not mean it's full of microplastics. It actually means that our brain changes its structure, like physically changes its structure in response to our environmental demands. So the more we do something, the more it responds. We become better at it physically because that's how our brain adapts. There are several stories about this in research. The most prevalent one is, I'm drawing a blank on the year, but in London, they have taxi drivers. And to become a certified taxi driver in London, it's a lot more difficult than here. You have to actually memorize all the streets and you have to pass a test of that map that's in your head now. And so they did a study where they took images of people's brains before they started it. And then they took a picture of people's brains after they passed the test. And they saw that the part of the brain that was responsible for navigation was actually bigger after the test. And so neuroplasticity is something our brains do until the day we die. Our brains are very neuroplastic when we're young. And as we become older, it becomes less so. However, we do still have neuroplasticity throughout our lives. And so the part of our brain responsible for stress, the amygdala, becomes bigger the longer we're stressed. So we become better at being stressed, which isn't something that's desirable for most people. And stress actually decreases the neuroplasticity, which makes it harder to get out of that state of constantly being stressed. So stress very strongly counteracts our ability to perform on the job. And this is a prevalent issue. So this is from Gallup. Half of workers are unsatisfied with their jobs. 30% of workers find their jobs to be stressful in of itself. 40% of workers see their job central to their identity, which means it affects them outside of work as well. I am within that 40%. And then a third of adults have been diagnosed with depression over their lifetime. So pretty big impact throughout at least the US. All right, so I kind of talked at you a lot. We're going to do a little activity here. So open Notepad, Excel, piece of paper, sticky notes, doesn't matter what it is. We're going to do this thing called the day reconstruction activity. And it's virtual, and I know it's later in the day. So I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes to start this. And so the idea is you're going to have 2 columns, and you want to start thinking through what are the activities that you've done today. Write them in the left column. And then on the right, a Likert scale is 0 to 6. You're going to say 0, I did not like that at all. Maybe I even hated it. Maybe it made me miserable. 6, one of the highlights of my day. So for me, getting up to an alarm at 6 a.m., I hate it. I'm not a morning person. I am usually off to a bad start. However, during the pandemic, we were talking about pandemic changes. I started hand grinding my coffee every day. And so I have a fresh cup of coffee that I absolutely love. I start my day by actually doing something physical. And so that is a great experience for me. All right, so I'm going to start the stopwatch now or start the stopwatch now. 2 minutes, just think through this and go.
Brad,
Yes, sir.
just so we're supposed to write what we did today and then how we liked it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, that is 2 minutes. That should give you an idea of the activity. I would encourage you to take time to do more on your own and think through your day. Does anyone want to share maybe something that you didn't think about until this activity, maybe surprised you or otherwise?
I don't mind sharing.
Thank you.
So I have 4 kids, and writing this down made me, I already knew, but my day is really structured around my children, especially my 2-year-old and my 6-year-old. They're not very self-sufficient, so everything is dependent on me and my husband. So I wake up 30 minutes before I have to wake them up so I can just have a moment for myself. So in writing this, I realized that I am actually taking that 30 minutes, even though it doesn't feel like it sometimes.
Appreciate that.
So,
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Sean, would you like to go ahead as well, please?
Hi, everybody. I also sort of did the activities of my day, and this afternoon I walked to the library, which was really nice because it just wasn't raining. The sun was kind of shiny, and it was a nice 10-minute walk there and back to get my library book. And that actually made me, I didn't realize it, but until I wrote down a 9, but it made me really happy to like get my new book.
Love it.
Thanks for the activity.
Thanks so much. And
Thanks for sharing.
go ahead, please. And we're just looking for raised hands. If you want to go ahead, and we can be able to unmute you from there.
Really great activity. I second what the previous person shared. I just I could focus more on like specific details within an activity that I wouldn't have really noticed before, and I'm realizing it's really enjoyable, whether it's the sun on my face or I'm smelling some flowers as I walk into the grocery store. And this morning I was just I was at a supermarket bright and early, and everybody was setting up, and it was just a really nice bustle, and people were friendly. It just, I wouldn't have thought to even write that down until you brought up this activity. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. If one more person wants to share, we have time, and then we'll move on.
People want, they can also contribute in the chat.
All right, that's okay. You don't have to share.
I was just a little surprised that I didn't have a more positive spin on more of the event. It was kind of like mowing through all this list of obligations and trying to be on time.
Yeah. I mean, this activity is important because I think we tend to just get busy and we don't really think, how is this making me feel? And if you're an older gentleman like myself, you oftentimes we're told not to feel, just get it done. And it compounds over time, and it affects your day in ways that you don't always realize. And so I encourage you to do this in your personal life, in your professional life. Think about those things, and maybe some things that you don't enjoy so much, you can find workarounds, or try to do something you enjoy after that, right? To kind of counteract it and make sure your day's balanced. So if you see a list of a bunch of stuff where you're like, man, I hate all of this, right? Find a way to stick something in there that you do enjoy then.
There's also something we said, Brad, for if we're rating things solely by happiness, we're going to be basing it on a metric based on, happiness. Like we're going to shape our lives based around that. And if
Definitely.
there's going to be times where we have emotions or feelings that are going to be able to move us in a forward direction that aren't necessarily going to be happiness. But still, there's some degree of catharsis or some other kind of thing that we have to engage with.
Yes, sir.
A happy feeling.
Definitely. All right. Yeah. So that's the whole activity. I like it because it's nice and simple. All right. Does anybody have a guess what the #1 cause of stress at work is?
The boss hole.
Boss hole.
John, go ahead.
Coworkers.
Coworkers, distractions, boss and deadlines, management. People quit over bad bosses. It's true. That is also what Gallup has found. Those are all right. If they stress you, being stressed is a personal experience. However, from research, the #1 thing that stresses out people universally is a lack of control. And I bet a lot of these things that you're listing could roll under this lack of control. And so they did a research with nurses where they found out that it didn't matter the perceived stressful events throughout the day or how difficult the day was or how long the hours were. It came down to whether or not they felt like they were in control of their day. And that was what led to fatigue and stress. You know, fatigue is something that we still don't fully understand in the brain as well, like why we get fatigued, other than these sort of performance things and perceptions. And so how that manages to manifest at work, you know, as people said in the chat, micromanaging, limited decision-making power, constant oversight from a superior supervisor, or monitoring tool. I know that's something that's become kind of big during the pandemic. Research has also shown that even a monitoring tool makes you feel like you're not in control. And then strict processes, which is Agilist, I'm sure we love to see in there. Mandated deadlines and goals, lack of psychological safety. Can I tell my boss bad news and not get my head chewed off or fired? Right. And so the point of this is that we are biologically wired to perform worse in a command and control environment. So it's no longer because the Agile Manifesto said so. It's no longer because, you know, we're just these fun hippies that want to have fun at work. It's science at this point. It's biology. As we produce cortisol, we perform worse. And so let's talk about what does it mean to feel in control then? Right? Let's not just talk about the negative, the positive side of it. How do we feel in control? Well, when we feel in control, it means that we're motivated to do the things that we're doing, and we want to do those things. And there's really two types of motivation. There's what's called controlled motivation or extrinsic, where we expect to receive a reward or a punishment. And then there's autonomous motivation or intrinsic, which is really three buckets: control, competence, connection. Now, this work is from Edward, DC, and Ryan from the 80s, who are like renowned psychologists. They have books in that. You have just learned about this from Dan Pink, who brought this to the business world as autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Right? So control, autonomy, competence, mastery, connection, purpose. Same thing. Although what's interesting is the purpose thing. I'm not fully sure where Dan Pink got that from. I didn't look into it. In DC's actual research, it's relatedness. Maybe that is your purpose, but humans need to feel, we're tribal animals. We need to feel connected. And purpose can definitely do that. And so autonomous motivation is greater than controlled motivation, which is another thing you would have seen from Dan Pink. Right? So intrinsically motivated employees are 3 times more engaged. Positive extrinsic motivators lose effectiveness and can even diminish engagement with time. That goes back to the Dan Pink farmer story, right? Or the farmer was the IQ one, my bad. But just in general, they found once you take the people's needs off the table financially, that money no longer motivates people. And the same thing has been shown with bonuses. Right? The first bonus is nice. Everyone after that you enjoy, but it doesn't necessarily motivate you. And then, no surprise, negative extrinsic motivators create stress, leading to cortisol production. Right? If I'm going to get punished for something, I'm stressed about it. So no bueno. So when we talk about control or autonomy, this is a word that I feel like gets thrown around a lot in the Agile space, but we don't really break down what does it mean, especially when we say empowered, you're empowered. And this is something as a coach I used to do, and I kind of learned the hard way. I'd walk into a team and I would be like, I have just freed you from tyranny. You are now empowered to do whatever you think is best. And they've never thought before about what they should do or what they think is best. And so, and the reason was because they didn't have the ability. They didn't have the ability to self-manage themselves, didn't have necessarily always the knowledge to know what to do, and they didn't always have the resources. Resources here, I'm not talking about people. If I expect you to code, you need a laptop to code, right? You need the right tools. And then you actually need authority. You need to actually be able to do the things that you're supposedly empowered to do. An activity for that is a delegation ladder. Think about it. I like to think about like with kids. I know there's other parents in here. You wouldn't take a toddler and say, you're empowered, and just let them go in the kitchen. Right? But over time, you teach them how to use the kitchen. You teach them, how to safely use the silverware, how to use the cooking appliances, and so on. So the idea is you always want to meet someone one step above where they're currently at. That's why it's called a ladder, to slowly teach them how to be more autonomous. You also need guardrails and expectations set. So I need to know, what do I have authority to do? What don't I have the authority to do? And like everything, you need psychological safety to be effective. I did see a question there that asked, what did I coach? I was an agile coach and product coach. So I was a consultant for years. I was an agile coach. I was the manager of product strategy and agility for the Western region, everything west of Mississippi at Insight Enterprises. Not a lot of work in California, though. All right, and let's talk about competence. So Peter Senge, who is probably known for writing the driest book in a professional setting ever, The 5 Disciplines of a Learning Organization, fantastic content, very hard to get through. He wrote it's, I don't know, it's complained about by a lot of people, but I like the audio version of it. I thought I don't know, they cleaned it up or something, and audio is a lot easier to get through. But I'm not a huge audio person either. But that said, his reminder is that organizations learn only through individuals who learn. So if people aren't learning, our companies aren't learning. So growth is a natural human need. We all need to grow. Some of us grow in ways not always desirable, but it's out of our control. Especially thinking of Thanksgiving, we may grow a little bit wider than we want. Thinking about the neuroplasticity and the chemicals in our brain, right? The more the brain learns, the better it gets at learning. So that promotes brain health. There's these things called neurobics, which is essentially stepping outside of your comfort zone and breaking your usual habits. Our brain is really effective at conserving energy and responding quickly to situations. And it does that by creating neural pathways that respond based off of previous responses. And so an example might be brushing your teeth. You probably do the same thing every single time to brush your teeth, and you probably don't even think about it. Maybe you're on your phone, maybe you're thinking about the day, you're doing other stuff. Excuse me. So one way that you might break this usual habit is to use your non-dominant hand. You use your non-dominant hand, it's something that disrupts this habit and gets your brain kind of paying attention to it. And that's one way that you can kind of promote brain health. There's a lot of them. There's a book on it with tons of them. But the idea is we want to do things that we haven't always done before. Oops. Holy
Brad
smokes.
Singh's got a hand up.
Done here?
Yes. Feel free to answer while I go all the way back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Stuff.
Okay. So a question about neurobics, and we hear so often, whether it's in our personal or professional lives, that we need to step out of our comfort zone, really stretch ourselves. It's good for our brain. And I think for those of us who have actually done that and had difficulty with it, like there need to be some constraints about it, like some kind of real honest suggestions, because and someone once explained this to me in terms of football, right? There's a position in football that has the greatest uncertainty, and it is the most physically, emotionally exhausting position to hold in football. And so and I realized, wow, that's so true. When you step outside your comfort zone, you have to understand that you are going to be really challenged physically, emotionally. It's going to be really draining and exhausting. And how do you manage that process and also refuel? So like, if there's there's something that's really conscientious about like what that process looks like, how to manage yourself and your energy, I think that would be super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of stuff. Oh, I started back at the beginning. All right. Yeah. A lot of thoughts there. You know, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. Um, Mel Robbins talks about, she's got like this high five rule that she's kind of pushing right now, where you look in the mirror and you give yourself a high five in the mirror. And that's not something we normally do. That's something that's very different. However, a high five only ever is a positive thing for humans. And so you're giving yourself this positive experience in an unusual way that paths differently in the brain and kind of wakes you up and gets you to pay attention to that positive feeling. And so it's there's little things. It doesn't have to be anything, I guess, too crazy. Um, but thanks for the call out. Sorry about that. I like hit up on the keyboard or something and just like flipped all the way to the end. Never had that before. And then I forgot to start where I was. All right. Ding, ding. We're almost there. All right. So strength-based development boosts employee productivity by 8 to 18% as well. That's something we want to focus on as well. And when we think about growth as a natural human need, I mean, we talked about neurobics, but most of us have hobbies that we do as well. You know, if you play an instrument and you don't do that professionally, why do you play it? Why do you try to get better? And it's a natural thing where we want to do these things. We want to grow. We want to learn. All right. And now we are at relatedness or connectedness. So social support is a key predictor of happiness and life expectancy. Just blanket in general. America has been said it has an epidemic of loneliness. Interacting with others reduces pain, anxiety, and stress while boosting your mood through a different neurotransmitter that we haven't really talked a lot about yet, oxytocin. Excuse me. And employees with workplace friends are more engaged, productive, reliable, innovative, and collaborative. And it's been shown that collective intelligence and team learning strongly correlate with diverse cognitive styles and inclusivity, as well as collective intelligence or groupthink has been shown to outperform individual intelligence. So relatedness is something that is pretty important within our workplace, and it gives us a feeling of control. So now we've kind of talked about the work environment, feeling in control, or not feeling in control and what that looks like. But that's really just kind of covering I'll say the professional basics. Now I want to start talking about how can we promote happiness within our own lives, the things that we can do to give ourselves that, as Sean Aker calls it, the happiness advantage. And so I'll start by saying there are known ways to promote happiness within our own lives. Some people may not believe that, but we do know how to do it. However, there's no one thing, not to use snake oil. There's no one thing that we can do to make us happy, just like there really isn't usually one thing that makes us sad or depressed. It's a combination of things. It's that downward spiral. We need to do the inverse. It's a bunch of little things that exponentially grow to create what Alex Korb calls the upward spiral. And of that, just like our motivation, happiness is really an intrinsic thing. Only 10% of long-term happiness can be predicted by external factors. And yet society, our teachers, our parents, our bosses kind of teach us the opposite. We're trained to seek these external factors to try to be happy. Okay? If you need to get the good grades, you need to get the good job, you need the house with the picket fence, the car, all of those things. We think if we get them, we'll be happy, but we're not. There may be a little bit of happiness in the moment, but it doesn't last because we just moved the goalpost. We need a better grade. We need a better job. We need more money. We need, the next upgrade in the car, as well
Bigger
as
widescreen TV.
Exactly. Yeah. I know you've been watching those Black Friday sales. Um, yeah, exactly. And oftentimes when we're not as happy as we expected to be, it has the inverse effect. It's actually depressing to be like, I thought I was going to be happy and I'm not. This sucks. What's wrong with me? Right? And so uh, the short lesson in this presentation, there's a bunch of work and content on it, is intrinsic is really what we need to focus on to be happy. And we're going to start with another kind of sciencey thing called the reticular active system, or the RAS. You don't have to remember the name, but we need to understand what it does. And so the RAS filters 99% of our surroundings, which prevents sensory overload. We have senses around us all the time. If we noticed them all at once, we would go insane. Right? The temperature of everything touching us, and so on and so forth. And so our brain naturally has this system called the RAS that filters things out based on what's important to us. It's the reason why you can be in a crowded room, it can be very loud, and if someone yells your name, you hear it, catches your attention. That's your RAS kicking in. And so what we want to do is we want to actually retrain the RAS. And so while we can't wish ourselves to be happy, what we can do is we can train that part of our brain to look for the positive things that are already there. So I'm not saying make them up. We're not saying gaslight yourself. Right? You can have negatives and positives in your life. The reality is that we tend to notice the negatives, and the negatives add up. Usually you need 3 to 7 compliments to make up for one critique or insult. That's just kind of how our brains work. And they don't fully understand why. Some people it's more than others. But if we think back throughout the history of humanity, in order to survive, we had to notice those threats. We had to notice the negative things around us. And so we're very good at that. I also feel like as an agile coach or an agilist whose job it is to constantly improve and grow, I'm always looking for those things that can improve. And sometimes it feels like I get stuck in a negative mindset. And so just like that activity that we did earlier, the daily activity where you tracked how it made you feel, you can do the same thing. Track some of the things in your life that you're thankful for, that you're like, wow, that was really great that this was in my life, or that was something that happened today that was awesome. You get to relive the moment, as well as you're training your brain to notice those things. And then the other thing is meditation. Meditation is known to reduce stress, it increases focus, and it can actually physically restructure your brain in 6 to 8 weeks. The most recent study I read, I believe the lady did 30 minutes a day for 6 to 8 weeks, and they did MRIs of her brain, and they found that the amygdala actually got smaller in just that little bit of time. So it doesn't take long for its effect. Sung, you have your hand up.
Go ahead,
So
Sam.
thank you. What's really powerful that I've never tried before with your exercise, Brad, is the grading of, or just like putting a number of the happiness score to it. I mean, I've done the mindfulness, I've done the ABCs of gratitude, where I go through the list of, A to Z and all the things around me that I'm great. And you can tell like this stuff just, it seems kind of rote, it's on a record, it's a groove, and I just kind of run through it. But to put a happiness score on it and realize, wow, these small things actually score pretty high on the happiness scale. Like that was a big eye opener for me. And I have to, I'm really impressed with that exercise. I'd love to get more of those.
Definitely. There's a book on neurobics that has some stuff, but if I find more exercises, I'll share. That is the one exercise like that I have, so I threw it in there. Sean Aker has like his calls it boot camp or whatever. It was on Oprah and stuff, where it's like 21 days, do these activities and you'll notice a difference. Not that you'll be completely happy. And like the gratitude journal was in that. Sending a thank you note every day to someone is a great way to build relationships. So you have like that social relatedness factor, but it also like is spreading the wealth, stuff like that. John.
John, go ahead.
Oh, but
All right, thanks so much, Brad. Go ahead and we'll take the next person here.
All right. The other thing that's really important throughout the day is to take a break, especially if you're in virtual meetings and you're remote all day. This study was done by Microsoft, actually, in their Human Factors Lab. And what they found was that stress builds up over time. So they had this really, really cool EEG cap they put on people's heads. And then they forced them to sit in meetings all day. And at the top, you see no break, that the stress actually builds up throughout the day. Whereas when they introduced the break throughout the day, they kept a relatively flat reading as far as their stress waves went. And so, yeah, they found you just introduce little breaks throughout your day. For them, they did 10-minute breaks and they had everyone meditate as the control. You don't have to meditate. You can go for a walk, just get away from your desk, grab a snack. Doesn't matter what it is. The important part is take a break to keep your stress levels down. And then we already touched on the one, right? The two largest predictors of happiness and overall life expectancy. So how long people tend to live. The first is your social interactions or your relatedness. Right? We already touched on it. Interacting with people produces oxytocin. What I didn't touch on earlier is that oxytocin actually has a lot of the same receptors as serotonin. So it gives you the same kind of feel. It reduces pain, anxiety, and stress. And then not only do the parts of your brain, as we talked earlier, the plasticity, get better at interacting with people the more you do it, oxytocin actually activates those centers as well. So as you release oxytocin, it makes you better at interacting with people. For my fellow introverts. And when we talk about life expectancy, there's this research out there called the Blue Circle that is really fascinating. It's a book, it's a documentary on Netflix. There's plenty of stuff that talks about places where people live longer. They call them centurions, people that live over a century, on average more than other areas in the world. And there's a bunch of factors that they call out, but across all of the different cultures, these two things were the largest. One was your social connections inside and outside of work. And then the other is moving. Right? Sedentary behaviors increases all-cause mortality risk by 20 to 30%. So regular exercise can be as effective as medication for treating depression. Once again, I'm not a doctor. Talk to your doctor if you have depression or need help. But that's what the research shows. And I mentioned I had this peer-reviewed by Dr. Garcon. And I had sitting is the new smoking, because that's like the article that we keep seeing. And she was like, no, smoking is smoking. You can't say that. But it is one of the most unhealthy things in our lives right now. Jim, do you have a question or comment?
No, just a comment. In the past few weeks, there have been reporting of what may account for some of what's been seen with the blue zones. Turns out it's a data sampling and reporting problem in some cases. You got to look at the motivations. In Japan, they were finding that some of the people were reporting that their parents were living to these extraordinary ages because they were able to collect the benefits for much longer. So they were relying on what year they were born and such. So not to say that any of these things that you're suggesting are bad. It's just that when you look at the blue zone stuff, check out some of the more recent things they found about the data sets.
Sure.
Moving to Okinawa may not give you an extra 10 years.
Yeah,
maybe on paper.
Maybe only on paper. Yeah, I know in his books, I've listened to the full book. That is something they're suspicious of when they meet these people. They actually are like, in general, across all the cultures. They're like, is this real or not? I'm sure some of it isn't, but we do know that mobility makes a huge difference. Actually moving. Humans aren't meant to sit all day. And when we talk about mobility, it's literally just moving. It's not necessarily going and becoming a bodybuilder. It's taking well, I think they say 2-hour walk a day or garden for an hour. So I'm always like, well, I guess I better pick up gardening because walking for 2 hours is a long time. But there's other activities. The idea is just move. But if knowledge was enough to motivate us, there would never be smokers, right? That's the saying. And so, this is just some information. There's a lot more on it, but I also want to touch on behavior design when it comes to how we change our habits. Because giving you the knowledge, I realize, is probably not enough. And so we really want to look at the brain again and think, how does the brain operate? And we talked about dopamine. Dopamine is the reward center. So if we celebrate any win, we're releasing dopamine, which makes us correlate that thing with positive feelings. And it doesn't matter how big or small it is. It doesn't matter how you do it. Some people do a little dance. Some people give themselves a high five. I think it's James Clear talks about how, if you're going to have the sweet anyway, run up and down the stairs one time and turn it into a reward. Right? Now it's a positive thing. And that's because a behavior becomes more automatic when you feel a positive emotion or the relief from a negative one. And then the other thing is don't get caught up in perfecting the new change. Most of these things are from DJ Fogg, but that in particular is from James Clear, where he talks about how we have a tendency to overthink our new habit or a new change. And a perfect example of that is New Year's is pretty close. Gym subscriptions tend to go way up because everybody has this plan to get in shape. And so that you buy the gym subscription, maybe you go on Amazon or your local mall, you buy all of the athletic clothes. If you're like me, you're watching a bunch of YouTube videos for like, what is the best workout to be the most effective with my time? And you create this whole routine of, I'm going to, on Mondays, I'm going to do these exercises, on Wednesdays, these, on Fridays, these. And you put all of this stuff on yourself. Whereas if you just went into the kitchen and curled like a can of soup or a can of spaghetti sauce, you've already worked out more. So, let's apply the agile mindset here. Iterative, incremental, small. Right? Small changes are better. An example he gives is if you're going to go running, right? If that's your goal is to start running, start by just getting your shoes out. And then after a while, start by putting on your shoes. Right? Just getting in the motion of doing these little things, over time, they'll build on themselves. There's also things called habit chaining too. So an example might be if you brush your teeth every night and you want to floss when you brush your teeth. Maybe you're not a flosser. You can say, when I brush my teeth, that's my prompt to floss, and then give yourself, some sort of reward after. And then the key is, right, decrease the time between rewards. As we mentioned, small, celebrate the wins, you're getting the dopamine hit. The other thing is reduce the effort, which increases the ability to do it. So if you want to journal, for example, maybe you want to do that daily activity every day, and you say, well, my prompt is, when I get in bed, I'm going to write in my journal. Cool. Put the journal next to your bed. You'll see it. It'll be a visual reminder, and then it's there, which increases your ability to do it instead of getting in bed, laying down and going, oh crap, it's across the room. Well, I don't want to get up now. Right? It's those things, setting yourself up for success. So to summarize, right, our brains are biologically wired to perform best when motivated intrinsically in a democratic or agile environment. Right? Feel-good hormones are responsible for that performance. Stress hormone shuts down the feel-good hormones, And the number one cause of stress at work is a lack of control. There are many stressors, but I really want to drive home this presentation, lack of control, because that aligns, I think, with what we're seeing with leaders in the industry, as well as what we're trying to promote in agility. Yes, Atomic Habits is by James Clear, as Terry Hall mentioned in the chat. There's also Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg and the Tiny Habits Academy, which is what Dom is associated with. All right. If you want to expand your understanding more, as I mentioned, there's 45 resources in this book. We just touched on Tiny Habits, but The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker is really where I started my journey. He's got a TED Talk that's a decade or more old now. One of my favorite TED Talks of all time, and it's on the happiness advantage, and it got me started. However, I would say it's pretty high level. Most of the science in this, other than studies, which I've referenced, but the chemicals in the brain, how the brain responds, is from The Upward Spiral by Alex Korb. Fascinating book, highly recommend. If you are not a doctor or you don't have a background in biology, there's probably a lot of it that will go over your head. I know it did me, but I still got a lot out of it. And I believe the next slide has audio, and I've had it where I've just stood and stared awkwardly at the camera while where I heard the audio, no one else did. So give me a thumbs up if you hear it.
We'll give you a heads up, Brad. Don't worry.
My biggest concern, investments on AI to make machines smarter. There's no limit to the amount of money that's been pumped into it. The investment in HI to make humans smarter, human intelligence, that's just sad. It's sad that we're going to live in a world right around the corner where machines will be more articulate, analytical, critical thinking, banter ability, contextual, deep understanding, while we have resorted to short tweets, emojis, memes, and stickers to communicate.
So pretty powerful words from Will.i.am there. I like to say here, I get all my sage advice from Will.i.am. But in seriousness, he was starting an AI company. He was being interviewed about it and asked this question. And I loved it so much, I named my talk Human Intelligence after this interview clip. And I think it's really powerful. And that's something that I also want to encourage companies to think about is we are writing blank checks right now when it comes to things like AI, which is a tool. And we, as Agilists, teach people over tools, right? And interactions and all of these things that are very people focused that I'm not seeing in organizations, especially this year, has been, I think, a little bit rougher for a lot of people. And so if you are at a company or you've been at a company, think about how much are we actually spending on trying to make people awesome. And I would bet money that even this talk, a small sample of this research, probably has never been shared with you in a professional setting because managers are undertrained and HR tends to focus more on process and organizational things and less about how humans actually function. So thank you. We are done. As I mentioned, the slides are available for you. This is my short URL that you can go to, block/hi. It's not paywalled or data walled or whatever you would call it. It goes straight to the PowerPoint that you just saw, including all of the references. They're available for you. Please add me on LinkedIn. I'd love to stay in touch. Always open to ask more questions if you think of them after the fact. And then, as I mentioned, this was peer reviewed by a doctor. She loved it so much. I didn't know her before this. Like, that was how I introduced. I was specifically looking for a doctor to peer review this. She loved it so much that she said, if you're interested in similar things, right, that she is giving discounts. Just say my name. Cool. Any more questions or thoughts?
Brad, thanks for talking about that loss of control question. That speaks to the importance of self-organization and getting people both to take it on in their own work, but also for managers to let go of that. We're going to have Ron Lichty come back in April and talk about self-organization, both what you can do as an individual in a team to help foster self-organization, and also for managers to learn to let go because of the importance that we see here in having people have that sense of control over, and self-direction over what they do, how much it impacts their satisfaction in the work environment. So that's a nice springboard for for one of our 2025 sections.
And I see that we have Helen with her hand raised here, and then we have Seung. And folks are welcome to unmute themselves here. I think we've potentially removed any interrupting bad actors, for lack of a better word.
This is Helen. I have a question. Because I know many people in the company are religious. They go to Bible studies, my co-worker, every Thursday. I wonder if there's a study that can tell us if religion does make people happier, stronger, under stress, and have more new ideas, because they say wisdom is from God. If there's such a study, it might be helpful for some people. And the church is also a social environment, because you can meet people who have similar interests.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, there's been some. I don't have them off the top of my head. There has been some. You hit on some of the key topics there. In the Blue Circle book that may be debunked, partially at least, one of the Blue Circles are the Jehovah's Witness in California. The way they live for community. They are pure in their diet and the things they put in their body. They're more active. All of these things that we see out of people, religion or not, that makes them tend to be healthier, is an everyday part of their life and their culture.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brad, I really want to thank you so much for this incredible presentation. I don't think I can ever say, well, maybe in the past few years, I don't think I've attended any Zoom meeting that has had this much consequence for me, because I didn't know that I'm actually very happy. And isn't that really strange? I'm sure I can't be the only person out there who's realizing, wow, all these moments in my life have contributed, like, they score 7, 8, 9, and for me, they seem inconsequential. But because they're not toward the big goals in my life, but they make me very happy. And there's small moments when I'm just moving about my day, engaging with people, saying hello, doing a little bit of chit chat here and there. And so I really want to thank you for just giving me like a different lens prescription on my life. Like I just realizing, wow, I'm happy. Which is, again, it's so weird. And I have to admit, I have been a micromanager in the past, because a direct report wasn't really able to kind of manage upstream and anticipate next steps. I kind of felt like, I don't know if, Jim, that's a topic that you're going to be addressing in future meetings, but it's like, I really needed that. And she was like maybe 4 or 5 years out of college. I totally understand. Like she hadn't really learned those ropes yet. But you really need a person who understands how to anticipate challenges and then work toward addressing those before they actually surface. You need someone to do that. And managing higher ups, as I said, managing upstream, how do you train people to do that more if they're really struggling with that, so they can have autonomy and I can be less micromanaging?
Yeah, there's activities and trainings, and Jim probably has some stuff. I mentioned the delegation ladder. is one of them.
I specifically asked Ron if he would take two views on it in his talk. One is the view of a person in a team who maybe has a manager who needs some help in letting go a little bit. And the other one is speaking more directly to people who are in management roles and have trouble with the letting go, and some coaching on how to move yourself toward being willing to let that control go and let the people organize themselves. So we'll take two views of it in that April talk. So don't miss that one. Or sorry, that's in May. That'll be in May.
Simon Sinek says the best manager books are parenting books.
Oh yeah.
I see Andrew Huberman mentioned in the chat here. His name was mentioned to me recently too. I'm not familiar with his work, but I've noticed that happiness is a budding field. There are actually happiness consultants out there now, which surprised me. I don't know how well they're doing. I don't know if any consultants are doing great this year, but there are a lot of people out there. Right now, I've been reading a book by Mike Viking, which is like the coolest name ever. He's from one of the Scandinavian countries that are known for happiness, and he created the first Happiness Institute, and he's got lots of books, all titled in his language that are eluding me at the moment, but work my way through those.
Brookshawn, go ahead, please.
Hi, yeah. So I always think of people, so I think you can usually divide people into sort of like optimistic and pessimistic types. And I know that I am an optimistic type of person in general, just because, even when like things are really, crappy, I can always say like, well, at least I'm healthy, at least I'm okay, I have a roof over my head, like I can see the silver lining in things. But my point in getting to speak was that I feel like happiness as a word is a very sort of odd and American thing to think about. And I often think living a contented life is better than a quote happy one. And so, just I try and sort of replace the word like, am I happy? Like you can be happy for a week or a day or whatever, but like you can be content for a lifetime.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that. And I think a lot of the research would agree. We do tend to put happiness on a pedestal, or we expect to feel these super joyous emotions all the time. And that's why a lot of them teach gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Think of the things you're grateful for, and you realize that the thing that you wanted, you achieved, likely. And that really kind of changes. It's all a paradigm shift, as Stephen Covey says. So
Well,
thank
it's
you for
in the
sharing.
Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it is very much embedded in our culture, in the American culture.
Yeah. So true. So true.
Yeah, I like Will Smith's movie on that, where he points out the pursuit there is very intentional.
Nobody guaranteed you were going to get it, but you get a chance to try.
Right. Cool.
All right. Well, at this point, I'd like to take a few minutes to allow a little bit of networking to happen. I don't see any reason to break out of this size room. Feels pretty reasonable at this point. So if you'd like to get to know anyone else in here, it's always good to turn on the camera so we can see your face.
Absolutely.
Edward, are you going to change the settings?
Yeah, we had a bit of a bad actor earlier, but it's free to be able to turn on your camera here. Thanks for your patience, folks.
Live people. Hey, I remember some of these folks from class.
But I think for right now, I just want to say thank you so much, Brad. for your time and for everything that you're able to contribute here. We're going to bring a recording to the close here because we want to be able to just let folks be able to check in with one another and catch up here. But I want to say thank you, and please stay on for the call. But I want to say thank you to anyone that was watching our recording today, and we would love to be able to catch up further. Hey, Carol.